Ms. Camp, are you familiar with the FBI's use of DVE, or domestic violent extremism threat tags?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Can you say that again?
Yes. Are you familiar with the FBI's use of DVE, or domestic violent extremism threat tags?
I am not.
Okay. Ms. Camp, can you point to even one situation where the Department of Justice or FBI treated a pro-abortion protester, arsonist, vandalizer, rioter, or attacker similar to how they treated Mr. Houck?
Well, thank you, Congresswoman. I want to say that I oppose violence.
I didn't ask that question. Can you point to even one circumstance where a pro-abortion attacker, protester, arsonist, vandalizer, or rioter were treated by the DOJ or FBI similar to how they treated Mr. Houck?
Well, I want to be responsive, but I want to reiterate that the National Abortion...
Do you know of even one person?
Ma'am, the National Abortion Federation is a professional organization of abortion providers. We track violence against those who provide and access abortion care. We don't track other kinds of violence.
So you can't point to even one incidence where a pro-abortion protester, arsonist, vandalizer, or rioter was treated similar to how the DOJ and the FBI treated Mr. Houck. Can you? Is that your testimony?
Well, what I can tell you is that when the DOJ put out a reward for information on 10 different incidents, 9 of them were at anti-abortion.
Did they raid anyone's home and arrest someone in front of their 7 children with guns drawn?
Well, no, they're just looking for information.
Okay, that's what I thought. Mr. Dyes, I want to thank you for being here today, and your testimony is important as someone who has firsthand experience working with the victims of these heinous crimes that have been described. Mr. Dyes, are you familiar with the committee's investigative work and findings about the DOJ and FBI's weaponizing domestic extremism threat tags and statutes against Americans' constitutionally protected rights?
Not beyond what you've revealed this morning.
Okay, but you have represented clients whose clinics, employees, or patients have been subjected to vandalism and violence from pro-abortion groups, haven't you?
Yes, ma'am.
How do you respond to the reality of a DOJ which is labeling parents using constitutionally protected speech as domestic violence extremists, or padding crime stats to falsify the record about a rise in domestic extremism, but does little to nothing about politically motivated attacks on your clients, which could actually qualify as domestic extremism?
It's certainly disconcerting, and I think that exemplifies precisely why the FACE Act is important, because when we have a situation where speech reaches a tipping point into violence, that's where we find ourselves at with these situations, where we characterize speech as violence instead of violence as violence. Violence has no place in our political dialogue, and certainly we should not express our political disagreements with a brick or a crowbar through a window. That's what our clients have had to endure, along with many other instances like that. And yet there's only been the single indictment with 4 people indicted under that in response to the 100+ attacks in the past year.
Well, then I was just going to get to that. As you mentioned in your testimony, the Department of Justice has returned just 1 indictment in response to the over 100 acts of intimidation, injury, and interference towards those seeking service from pro-life organizations in the past year. Yet even before the Dobbs decision, the DOJ announced the standing up of an abortion rights task force. So not only is the DOJ on the one hand infringing on protected rights connected to peaceful actions, it is not enforcing the law when violations are targeted at the same political groups that the DOJ itself has been targeting. It is instead prioritizing the protection of law based on its preferred political narrative, which in this case is the pro-abortion movement. Are you aware of any task forces, memos, or priorities being set by the DOJ, which would also focus attention to protecting pro-life and religious facilities under the FACE Act or any of its other authorities?
I am not, but my clients would welcome that.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.